The slap didn't land on my skin. It landed on my soul. My mother's words that night cut deeper than anything physical ever could. "Layla, not everything is about you," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to slice through the hum of laughter around the table. The air turned brittle. Everyone looked away, eyes darting like they were afraid to witness my humiliation. Across from me, my sister Clara lifted her champagne glass, the diamonds on her new Cartier watch winking under the chandelier. A $15,000 watch, my parents' gift to her for their anniversary. My gift, apparently, was invisibility. I hadn't even been invited to the celebration at first. My mother said it was just family, and I guess somewhere along the way I stopped qualifying as that. But when I saw the photos online, Clara, my mother, my father, even a few cousins I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in shades of ivory and gold, smiling in front of a cake that read "Forever in Love," something inside me snapped. They'd taken a family photo without me. I don't know what possessed me to drive 3 hours that night, maybe the ghost of hope that hadn't yet learned how to die. I showed up unannounced, still in my work uniform, smelling faintly of coffee and exhaustion. When my mother opened the door, the smile that flashed across her face wasn't joy. It was irritation, carefully disguised as politeness. "Oh, you came," she said, glancing over my shoulder like she expected me to bring trouble in with me. The living room shimmered with light, candles, laughter, Clara's voice wrapping around every conversation like silk. My father barely looked up from his seat, his attention fixed on Clara's husband, the man who never missed a chance to boast about his latest business deal. Clara turned when she saw me, her lips curling into that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Layla," she said, her tone warm enough for an audience. "We didn't think you'd make it." I looked at her wrist, at the gleam of the Cartier watch. "Looks like you're celebrating something big," I managed to say, keeping my voice even. "Oh, this?" she laughed lightly, showing it off. "They said I deserved something timeless." The words hung between us like poison. My chest burned. I'd been the one paying our father's medical bills when he had a stroke, the one covering my mother's mortgage when the insurance ran out, the one sending money while Clara was in Paris posting photos of croissants and rooftops. And now she was the one who deserved it? I bit the inside of my cheek to stop my voice from trembling. I wanted to leave right then, but pride rooted me to the floor. My mother, ever the queen of composure, clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone," she said, "let's take a family photo before the cake melts." She turned to me, her smile tightening. "Layla, maybe you can take it for us. We already did one earlier, but it'll be nice to have a few more from different angles." My throat went dry. "You want me to take the photo?" I asked, just to be sure I'd heard her right. "Yes, sweetheart, you always have such a steady hand." The laughter resumed, shallow and sharp. I stood there, staring at the camera and my trembling fingers, realizing this was my place in the family, behind the lens, unseen, forgotten. I lifted the phone, the image of them coming into focus, Clara glowing in gold, her hand on our mother's shoulder, my father smiling proudly, everyone fitting perfectly into the frame that had no space left for me. My vision blurred as I pressed the button. The click of the shutter felt like a nail sealing a coffin. "Got it," I said softly, setting the phone down before they could notice the tear threatening to fall. Clara tilted her head. "You're not staying for cake?" she asked, mock concern lacing her voice. "You just got here." I met her eyes, the same eyes that had always looked down at me, even when we were children. "No," I said, forcing a small smile. "I think you've already got your perfect picture." Her smile faltered for a second, but my mother's hand on her arm reminded her that golden daughters don't look guilty. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the polished floor, the laughter behind me echoing like an old wound reopening. Outside, the night was cool and silent, a sharp contrast to the noise I just escaped. I stood by my car, hands shaking, the house glowing behind me like a stage I'd been written out of. I thought of every sacrifice I'd made, every birthday I worked through, every bill I paid, every time I swallowed my pride just to keep peace in a family that never made space for me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of earning love that was never mine to begin with. As I sat in the car, I caught a glimpse of them through the window. Clara was laughing again, showing off her watch to another cousin. My parents were smiling, proud and oblivious. For a fleeting moment, I wished I could freeze that image so that someday, when everything changed, they could look back and see what they'd lost. I started the engine and drove off into the night, the sound of the tires on gravel drowning out the last of their voices. The farther I got, the lighter I felt, as though each mile peeled away a layer of guilt I'd carried for years. By the time I reached my small apartment, the clock had struck midnight. I sat in the dark for a while, staring at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken, just unfinished. Maybe this was the moment everything began again. I thought about all the times I helped others build their dreams while mine gathered dust in the corners of my mind. I used to study design before life got in the way, before responsibility replaced ambition. I used to believe that talent needed permission to shine, that if you weren't chosen, you weren't worthy. But sitting there, surrounded by silence and the hum of the city outside, I realized how wrong that was. No one was coming to save me, and maybe that was the best thing that could have ever happened. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder of sketches I'd hidden for years, the designs I'd made during late nights at the cafe, drawn on napkins between customers. My hands trembled as I clicked through them. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. I stayed up until dawn, building a website, creating a name, something that felt like a piece of me. By sunrise, I had a plan. I'd start small, custom designs, local clients, maybe a few online orders if I was lucky. I didn't need their approval or their applause. I just needed to begin. I looked out the window as light spilled over the city, golden and alive. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt unstoppable. But deep down, a voice whispered, they'll never believe it until they see it. And part of me wanted them to see it, to see what they'd thrown away, to realize too late that the daughter they dismissed had turned her silence into something powerful. I didn't know it yet, but that moment of quiet defiance was the beginning of everything that would follow, the success, the reckoning, and the night when the tables would finally turn. Because fate, as I would soon learn, has a way of bringing every forgotten name back into the spotlight, one breathtaking revelation at a time. The first year was chaos disguised as courage. I worked 16-hour days, balancing my cafe job in the mornings and design orders at night, the glow of my laptop painting my apartment walls in soft blue light. Sometimes I'd stare at the sketches until dawn, my eyes burning but my heart alive in a way it hadn't been in years. I sold my first piece, a hand-painted denim jacket, to a local boutique for $120, and I cried alone on my kitchen floor that night, not from sadness, but from the dizzying realization that someone finally saw value in what I made. That small win became a spark. I poured every ounce of myself into my craft, posting designs online, reaching out to small businesses, and offering to collaborate for exposure. Slowly, the orders grew. There were nights when my hands ached from cutting fabric, mornings when my back screamed from bending over the sewing table too long, but I refused to stop. For once, I wasn't serving someone else's dream, I was building my own. Within a year, my work was featured in a small lifestyle magazine. They called me the hidden gem of modern design. hidden. Funny how that word had followed me all my life. But now it didn't sting. It shimmered. By the second year, my pieces were being sold across 3 states, and I hired 2 assistants, girls just like me, overlooked, eager, relentless. My brand, L. Monroe Designs, became my armor. Every sale, every client review, every late-night email reminded me I'd made it out of the shadows my family had built around me. And yet, even success didn't silence the ghosts. Some nights I'd scroll through Clara's Instagram, watching her perfectly curated life unravel in subtle cracks. Less smiling husband photos, more captions about new beginnings. I didn't take pleasure in it, not really. I just noticed. Karma was quiet, but it was never late. Then one morning, an email arrived that made my hands tremble. It was from Maison Rivera, a high-end brand based in New York, offering a collaboration for their upcoming spring collection. They said they'd seen my work online and were impressed by the authenticity and craftsmanship. I read that email 5 times before I believed it. When the contract arrived a week later, I printed it out and stared at my name beside theirs. That's when it hit me. I had done what everyone said I couldn't. The girl who was told she'd never be enough had built something so undeniable that even the world's best wanted in. I signed the papers and whispered, "This one's for me." My business trip to New York was a blur of lights and opportunity. Meetings, fittings, press interviews. It felt like stepping into the version of myself I'd always dreamed of. For the first time, I didn't shrink in a room full of powerful people. I belonged there. When the collection launched 6 months later, my designs sold out in 3 days. L. Monroe Designs became a trending topic, and a few weeks after that, my name appeared in Forbes' Women to Watch. I remember standing in my apartment that evening, barefoot and stunned, the city lights spilling in through the window as if the universe itself was applauding. Then my phone buzzed, a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. My mother. I stared at the screen, frozen. I hadn't heard from her in over 2 years. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity clawed its way through. I answered, "Layla?" Her voice was softer than I remembered, lined with hesitation. "Hi, Mom." A long pause, then a sigh. "I saw you on TV. Your designs, they're beautiful. I didn't know you were doing all this." I leaned against the counter, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I didn't think you'd care." "Don't say that," she murmured. "Of course I care." But she hadn't cared when I was struggling to pay their bills or when I sat alone outside their house, forgotten in the cold. Now she cared because the world did. Before I could reply, she continued, "Clara's hosting a big event next month, her comeback's comeback party. She asked me to invite you personally. She thought it would mean a lot if the family was all together again." My stomach twisted. A comeback party? After everything? I wanted to hang up. I wanted to stay far away from the world that once crushed me. But another part of me, quieter, sharper, whispered, "Go. Not for them, for yourself." "I'll think about it," I said finally. "You should come," she urged, her voice trembling. "It would make your father so happy." After we hung up, I sat in silence, my heart caught between past and present. I told myself I'd moved on, that I didn't need validation, but deep down, I wanted them to see what I'd become, not out of spite, but because the little girl inside me still ached to be seen, even just once. The weeks leading up to the event passed in a blur. My assistant Emily picked out an emerald dress for me, sleek and minimal, but striking enough to command a room. Green suits power, and revenge if necessary. I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. The night of the party, I drove to the downtown hotel where it was being held. The parking lot glittered with expensive cars, laughter spilling out from the entrance like perfume. As I walked through the doors, the air dimmed for just a moment. Eyes turned, whispers followed. I could feel them trying to place me, that familiar face with a new kind of confidence. The woman at the door glanced at the guest list, her brows lifting. Elle Monroe, as in the Elle Monroe? I smiled faintly. That's me. Inside, chandeliers dripped gold, and the air smelled of money and desperation. Clara was easy to spot, her blonde curls perfect, her dress dripping sequins, her smile stretched a little too tight. When she saw me, her expression flickered between shock and something else, envy maybe, or disbelief. "Layla," she said, air kissing the space beside my cheek, "you look different." "Successful?" I offered, letting my smile linger. She laughed awkwardly. "Of course, I heard about your brand. Everyone's talking about it. So proud of you, sis." Her tone was sugar over glass. I noticed her husband hovering nearby, forced grin, distracted eyes, the kind of man who used charm like currency and was running out of both. "Mom's here somewhere. She's been telling everyone how creative you've always been." The irony almost made me choke. Always creative? The same mother who told me art was a waste of time? I followed her into the main hall, where investors mingled and photographers roamed. My mother appeared near the bar, her expression softening when she saw me. "Layla," she whispered, her eyes glistening, "you're even more beautiful in person." It was strange hearing her say that. I nodded politely, unsure how to respond. "Clara's doing something amazing tonight. She's announcing her company's new investors. It's going to be a big comeback." I smiled faintly. Good for her. The irony was suffocating, but I kept my composure. As the evening went on, Clara floated from guest to guest, bragging, laughing too loudly, pretending everything was perfect. Then, during a toast, she called for attention. "Before I share tonight's exciting news, I want to introduce someone special, my sister, Layla. She's been doing incredible things in design. We're so proud of her." The crowd clapped politely, a few murmurs rippling through as people recognized my name. "In fact," Clara continued, "some of my new investors are also clients of hers. Small world, right?" She laughed lightly, but her voice wavered because one of the men standing near her, a tall man in a navy suit, turned to me with sudden recognition. "Wait," he said, pointing slightly. "You're the Lila Monroe? We've been trying to reach you for weeks. Our company's next campaign uses your designs exclusively. We didn't realize you were Clara's sister." The room shifted. Cameras turned. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Clara's smile faltered. You work with them?" she asked, her tone cracking. "Yes," the man replied easily. "Her designs are the reason our launch sold out in 2 days. Brilliant work. We're honored to collaborate with her again." The applause that followed wasn't for Clara. It was for me. My mother's face turned pale, her eyes darting between us, realization dawning in slow, painful clarity. Clara tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. For the first time, she wasn't the center of attention. I felt the shift like electricity in the air, years of being ignored collapsing into this single, breathtaking moment. But instead of gloating, I just smiled and lifted my glass slightly. "Small world indeed," I said softly, meeting Clara's eyes. Her hand trembled as she reached for her drink. The crowd began to close in, reporters asking for photos, investors eager to talk. I could see my mother standing behind them, her pride and regret mixing into something fragile and human. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt instead was freedom. The version of me that once begged to be seen was gone. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had outgrown their love. I excused myself quietly, walking toward the balcony to catch my breath. The city stretched beneath me, glittering and alive, as though the universe itself was whispering, "You made it." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift off my chest. But as I turned to go back inside, I froze. Clara stood in the doorway, eyes red, mask cracked. "You think you're better than me now?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. I didn't answer. She stepped closer, her perfume cloying, her words venom. "You were nothing, Lila. You think a few dresses make you somebody?" I looked at her calmly, every scar inside me turning into steel. "No, Clara," I said softly. "They didn't make me somebody. They just reminded me I always was." Her face twisted, but before she could speak again, a waiter approached her husband inside the hall with a folder. The man's expression dropped, panic flickering across his face. Papers spilled, voices rose. Something was happening, something that would turn the entire night upside down. The commotion inside the hall grew louder as Clara's husband's papers scattered across the marble floor, investors whispering, cameras flashing, and all the polished charm of the evening beginning to unravel. I watched from the balcony doorway, my heart beat steady, the same rhythm I'd learned from years of holding myself together when everything else was breaking. A waiter brushed past me, murmuring an apology, and beyond him I saw my mother frozen beside the bar, her eyes darting between Clara, her husband, and the guests now murmuring behind their hands. The perfect world they'd built, glossy, brittle, and beautiful, with cracking in real time. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. The truth had its own way of walking into the light. A few guests recognized me now, not as Clara's sister, but as Lila Monroe, the designer whose name had filled magazines and headlines that very month. I heard them whispering it, and each syllable sounded like a piece of my old silence breaking free. Clara turned toward me, her face pale, eyes wide, desperation flickering behind her mascara. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the years of mockery, the dinners where I was the afterthought, the nights I cried alone because I thought I wasn't enough. Now I was standing in the same room, and the balance had shifted, not because I'd planned revenge, but because life had finally aligned itself with truth. One of the investors, a man from the same firm that had partnered with my brand, walked up to me. "Lila," he said warmly, ignoring the chaos around us, "we're actually launching your campaign in London next month. I was hoping to confirm your appearance." I smiled, sensing eyes turning toward us. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Send the details to my assistant." He nodded and excused himself, and I could feel Clara's stare boring into me, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. My mother finally stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Lila, what's happening?" I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who taught me to hide my pain behind politeness. "Nothing new, Mom," I said softly. "The truth's just louder tonight." She blinked, tears threatening, but before she could respond, the event coordinator called for attention again, trying to regain order. Clara's husband had disappeared into the back, phone pressed to his ear, face ashen. Guests were leaving quietly, murmuring apologies and excuses. Clara stood in the center of it all, her sequined dress catching the light in cruel irony. I took a slow breath and stepped toward her. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the electricity between us. She turned as I approached, her expression a fragile mix of anger and humiliation. "You wanted this, didn't you? To watch me fall?" I shook my head. "No, Clara. I just wanted to stop pretending that you were the only one that mattered." She flinched like the words stung, and for the first time I saw something raw in her eyes. Not vanity, not superiority, but fear. The kind of fear that comes when the mask slips and there's nothing underneath. "You always made me feel small, but that wasn't the truth. You just needed me to stay in the shadows so your light could look brighter." Her breath caught. "That's not true." "It is," I said, my voice low but steady. "And that's okay. You can stop now. You don't have to be perfect anymore." She stared at me, speechless, the fight draining her body as the weight of the evening pressed down. I stepped back and turned toward the doors, the crowd still watching, the tension thick but silent. My mother called after me once, "Lila, please, wait." I paused without turning around. "I waited my whole life, Mom. Now it's your turn." Then I walked out. The air outside was cool, the city humming below me like a living thing. I stood on the hotel steps for a long time, watching the lights blur through the faint mist. For the first time, I felt completely detached from the old version of myself, the girl who begged for attention, who mistook pain for love, who tried to earn her worth from people who couldn't see it. I was free. A few minutes later, my mother came out.
Her makeup was smudged, her voice barely a whisper. "You were right," she said, standing beside me. "I should have seen you sooner." I turned to face her, my heart steady but soft. "You don't owe me anything, Mom. I learned to see myself." She blinked, tears slipping silently. But before she could respond, it was time to go. I stayed there for a while, letting the night wrap around me, the sound of distant sirens, laughter, and the pulse of the city echoing like a heartbeat. My phone buzzed. It was Emily, my assistant. "Are you okay? Everyone online is talking about your appearance at the event. You just went viral." I smiled to myself, typing back, "I'm fine. Better than fine." As I walked toward my car, my heels clicking softly across the pavement, I passed the row of black sedans lined along the curb. One of the drivers stepped forward and opened the door for me, recognizing my face from the evening's coverage.
"Congratulations, Miss Monroe," he said with a respectful nod. I slipped into the seat, the city lights painting streaks of gold across the window. My reflection stared back, calm, confident, completely mine. The driver asked, "Home, ma'am?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Yes, take the long way." As we drove through the city, I thought of all the nights I'd spent staring at that same skyline from my tiny apartment, wondering if I'd ever belong anywhere. Now, the city looked different, not bigger, but closer, like it was finally letting me in. My phone buzzed again, messages from fashion editors, interview requests, congratulations from people who'd once ignored me. I didn't reply to any of them. Some victories didn't need an audience. When I reached home, I kicked off my heels and walked to the window. The plants I'd nurtured over the years lined the sill, blooming quietly under the streetlight glow. I made a cup of tea and sat there, the steam curling like a soft sigh in the air. I thought about Clara, not with anger, but with a strange tenderness. Maybe she would find her own kind of peace someday. Maybe not, but her story was no longer tied to mine. Mine was about survival turned into self-belief, pain turned into purpose. I picked up my sketchbook from the table, flipping through pages of half-finished designs, new ideas sparking to life. Tomorrow, I'd meet with my team about expanding internationally. Tomorrow, I'd keep building. But tonight, I allowed myself to rest, to simply exist in the stillness I had fought so hard to earn. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint rumble of thunder, the kind that comes before summer rain. It felt like cleansing, not warning. I smiled, whispering to myself, "You made it, Lila." Not loud, not dramatic, just a truth spoken softly into the dark. And as the first drops of rain hit the glass, I realized the most powerful revenge wasn't winning in front of them. It was rising so high that their opinion no longer reached me. The girl they left out of the photo had become the picture they'd never forget. Not because she demanded a place, but because she built her own frame.